Everyone, welcome to our lab review session for the midterms. Please put your first and last name and your school email in the chat so I could take attendance. So we're going to be going over a few diagrams, and in the chat, every time we go over an answer, please try to write down what you think it is as well before you review it. Make sure you try to get the spelling right, because spelling is just as important as knowing what it is. Because if you spell something wrong when you are in a medical position, you could accidentally misdiagnose someone and that could become problematic. So do your very best. So after everyone puts their names in the chat and your emails in the chat, then I could begin. And don't forget your emails. Okay, for this first diagram, it is a picture of a vertebrae. And in the chat, please put down what you think A is. This is not your spinous process. This is yeah, it's your dens. So this specific vertebrae, there's only one of it in your body. And this top part is called the dens. And this vertebrae is C2. Okay, so for B, since this is a specific vertebrae, what is B called? And the dens is the bone that helps you shake your head no, which is why it's super important to remember. So for B, it is your superior articular facet, and that is where the atlas C1 sits on right here. Okay, for C, what are these tiny holes called? This hole, yes, it's a transverse foramen. This hole is in all the vertebrae, and it just looks a bit squished in this one, but this bone also has it. D is, what is this part of the vertebrae called? This is the pedicle. And then if this is the pedicle, what is E? Yep, the lamina. And then what is F? This is the part that you said earlier, sky, the part that sticks out. Yep. The spinous process. Okay, this is your next bone, the ethmoid bone. What is A? This is a superior view. So you're looking at it from the top. This is your crystal galley, which is the rooster's crest. And it's also seen right here for A. Okay, what is C? What are these little holes in here called? This is the cribriform plate, and the olfactory senses is what goes through these holes. I always remember them because they're very rectangular. And then D is this part. It sits where your eyeballs are. Do you guys remember what that's called? Yep, the orbital plate. Okay. And A, we talked about is the crystal galley. E and F. What is E and F? These are pretty cool because they're inside of your nose, and when you breathe, it warms up the air, which is pretty cool. That's the space it holds to warm up the air. E is your superior nasal concha, while F is your middle nasal concha. And G, do you guys remember what that one is? It is half of your nasal septum. Yeah, it's your perpendicular plate. It's perpendicular to the ground. So it's 90 degrees in the ground. Pretty cool. And now the sinuses. What is A? What are these sinuses up here? You can palpate it. It's like right where your eyebrows and eyes, like in between that space. Sometimes when you're having like a cold, you could like massage that area. Yeah, that's your frontal sinuses. And then B, what is the one right under that? Yep, your ethmoid sinus. That's what we just talked about, where that one bone is. And then C, what are the ones on your cheeks called? Another hint is the bone here is, yeah, it's called the maxilla. And so that sinus on your cheeks is called the maxillary. And then D, what is the one right in the middle? It is your sphenoid sinus. And E, what is this one called? This one is not a sinus, so we're not going to look at E actually. Okay, for your mandible, your jawbone. It's one of my favorites because a lot of the parts are very mutually exclusive from each other. They're very distinct. So what is A? What is this big chunk of your jaw called? Another word for this is called branch. Ramus. Yep. Ramus means branch. B. What is the bottom called? Body. Yep. The body of the mandible. And C is this little like angle on the bottom. It has many different names. Oh, I just gave it away. It's called the angle or the gonial angle or the inferior border of the mandible. D is that hole in your jaw on the bottom. This is where a lot of blood vessels and nerves pass through. Yep, mental foramen. Mental means chin, foramen means hole. So whenever you see that hole, think of chin hole, mental foramen. E is the spots where your teeth are. Another word for it is honeycomb because it creates honeycomb-like shapes. Like if you take away all the teeth, it leaves these shapes behind. What is this little structure called where the teeth sits? It is called the alveolar process. Alveolar means honeycomb. Okay, F is this hole, another place where blood vessels and nerves innervate, go through. This one is another hole, but this time it is higher. This one is called the mandibular foramen. So like the one on your jaw, even though the other one's also on your jaw, but the other one's closer to your chin. That's how I differentiate it. G is this protrusion. What is G called? Coronoid process. It looks like a crown-like process. These bits right here, like a lot of times when people can get really stressed if the jaw gets displaced or if you hear cracking in the jaw, it's called TMJ. That basically means it gets like popped in and out of the coronoid process. Okay, H. What is H? This is another process. This is the condylar process. So it's another protrusion jutting out. Okay, now the skull bones. There's a lot of them, which is pretty cool. And in this diagram, we're also going to talk about the sutures, which are these like jigsaw like puzzle things. And it's pretty cool because as a baby grows, then the sutures help their skull and their brain expand safely. And a lot of animals also have sutures as a young child. And then when they grow, it starts fusing. But you can still see sutures, which is pretty cool. Okay, what is A? What is this bone called? temporal bone. Yep, the side of your head. What is B? Right here. Parietal. Yep. And then C. No, I don't see C. I think last time there was no C. So it was this bit, but you can't really see it. Okay, C is this suture. What is the suture called? This is the squamous suture. Okay, and D is the suture in the back. It is in a specific Greek letter shape. You guys remember what it was? This is a lambdoid. It looks like the Greek letter lambda. And an F is this bone in the back. This is interesting because, like, how your eyes see is all the way in the back of your head, which is why this bone is called the way it is, occipital. G is this hole. What is this? What is this hole called? Where you use to listen. Very long, 3 words. This is the external auditory, external acoustic meatus. Also heard it called external auditory meatus. So like outside a hole where you hear. H is this protrusion right here. The specific process. Another protrusion. This is the mastoid where you masticate. And then I, right here, what is this little thing coming out? It kind of looks like something you write with. That's how I always remember. It's a styloid process. Yep, that's true. Oh, I don't have I on here. Okay. J, there's no J. K. We just talked about this. This is your mandible. K, L. What is L? What is this part of the temporal bone called? This is one of two. This is a zygomatic process. That's true. And then M is the second half of this. What is that called? This is a temporal process. And if you add them together, you get your cheekbones. And I remember my professor always said, if you want to compliment someone on your cheekbones, you always say you have a nice zygomatic arch, which is the zygomatic process and the temporal process together. And then, oh, up here, what is the suture on the top of your head called? Like where your crown is? What is that called? Your coronal suture. Okay. And then P, what is this bone here called? This is your sphenoid bone. Q is the bone right here, the purple. The one where your nose is at. What's it called? Your nasal bone. R is where your tears are. If you know any Spanish, this word means tears. Lacromio. And that's where your tear ducts are. RS. This we just already talked about. It is your zygomatic bone. And then T, this is where your maxillary sinuses are. What is this bone called? Maxilla. And then U is the bottom bone, which is the mandible that we talked about earlier. The last one, W, the hole. Do you guys remember the hole? Your chin hole, where all of the nerves and blood vessels innervate to your teeth. This is your mental foramen. Okay. Foot bones. Oh, I wrote this down because this was an acronym the professor I took anatomy with always says to remember your metatarsals, your tarsals, I mean. Cheap tequila causes naughty love in Mexico. So the calcaneus right here, your talus, your cuboid, then your cuboids, yeah, and then your navicular, then your lateral, intermediate, and medial. And all of those letters correlate to something. Okay, so A, what is this called? Be very specific because when you're talking about your feet bones and your hand bones, you have to say what joint it is, or like what joint or what digit it is, what bone, as well as which finger. What is A? A is the distal phalanx of the hallux, which is your big toe. B is the proximal phalanx of hallux. Proximal means it's closer to you. C, okay. Since I gave you this acronym, what is C? This is the medial cuneiform. And so D is the intermediate cuneiform, and I is which one? The lateral cuneiform. Cuneiform, let me see. I wrote down the cuneiform just means wedge. So you see how they're like little wedges? The medial, intermediate, and lateral cuneiform. Okay, E. What is E? This is the bone right where your arch is. So it's good to know that your arch is one of the most powerful parts of a human body because it's giving your whole body a lot of support. This is your navicular bone. F, down here. This is your heel. Do you guys remember what your heel bone is called? Your heel bone is called the calcaneus bone. And then right where your whole body sits is your G right here, which is the talus. H is your cuboid bone. And then I is, like we talked about, the lateral. Yeah, you could say phalanx 1. That would make sense. And then the second one's phalanx 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, that would make sense. Phalanx is just another word for thumb. Okay, J. Okay, then maybe you could do J, K, and L. How would you name that specific digit? You'd first think about how is it relative to you in space. So L would be distal, K would be intermediate, and J would be proximal for those bones. And then you would say phalanx, and then the number of where it is relative to the whole foot. So for those specific 3, it would look like this. The proximal phalanx of digit 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. Middle or the intermediate phalanx, and then distal. Okay, and now what are these bones called for M, N, and O? It's one of my favorite words I learned. Phalanges. Also, your fingers are called phalanges. Your toes are phalanges, and your fingers are phalanges. And then it's your metatarsals, and then your tarsals. And then the same thing for your hand. It will be your metacarpals, and then your carpals. Okay, now it's our thoracic cage. What is A? What are these bones called? What type of ribs are they? These are your true ribs. And then B is your false ribs, and C are your floating ribs. D is right here. It's this tiny bone that's called the manubrium. And then E is the specific connection right here. It's called the suprasternal notch. And sternal means your chest. F is this part right here. That is a clavicular notch. Remember your clavicle, your collarbone where you could palpate? It connects directly onto the clavicular notch. And then G is where your ribs connect. And that is your costal notch. H is this insert right here. That's the sternal angle. I don't see any I. The letter's missing. You see it? I think I just wrote J. Okay, yeah, let's get the I. H I J. J is called the body. K. This is another one of the fun words. The xiphoid process, just like jutting out. And then L are the costal cartilages to protect the ribs. Ooh, now we're doing muscles. Your superficial back muscles are on the side. Okay, what is A? If you go to the gym a lot, you probably know this muscle. This is your trapezius muscle, also known as your traps. B is your shoulder muscles. Some people like to work on them, so they give them nice rounded shoulders. What is that muscle called? It's also a name of a Greek alphabet. They're deltoids. Yep, awesome. C is this muscle down here, and D is right under it. Every time you see two muscles that look very similar to each other, you always think major and minor, and these are your teres, major and minor. Minor is the smaller one on top. E is this muscle right here. This is the muscle you use to elevate your scapula. It's called the levator scapulae. Sounds like elevator. I was missing F. Okay, G is right here. These two muscles are also another major and minor group. They're your rhomboid. They look like a rhombus. I, J, J, and K. Okay, so here, J is this tiny muscle hiding. That is also your teres minor. K, also known as lats. They're latissimus dorsi muscles. And L are the finger-like muscles that look really cool when people work on them. They're called the serratus anterior muscles. Like it shows when people have abs on the other side too. Okay, and last but not least, our hip flexor muscles. What is A? Your psoas minor. And then what is B? Your psoas major. I like it when they have two muscles, yeah, that have the same name, but they're minor and major. That helps me remember it. C is by your iliac crest. You can actually palpate your crest, your hip bone, and the muscle is directly connected to it. This is called your iliacus. It's really good to stretch it out. Stretch out your hips. They mean stretch out your iliacus. And D is this muscle right here. What's that called? It's a combination of the first and second one. So it's an ilio psoas muscle, the P is silent. And that is all the review slides I have today. I'll be staying for if anyone has any question. Otherwise, good luck on your midterms. It's due this Sunday, I believe, this weekend. You should double check. But make sure you take your midterm test on time.